Hi, my name is Brian Apavu. I am a neurologist with an interest in philosophy, the mind, and living the examined life. Today, I want to tackle the topic of consciousness. And my goal with this video is not to tackle all of consciousness, but to really focus on the historical, physical, and metaphysical roots of how we think about consciousness. Consciousness remains one of the great mysteries of our lives. It is fundamental to us because all that we describe and all that we experience relates to our sense of consciousness. We can't live without experience, and we can't experience without a sense of consciousness. And yet, despite this, we still do not have in the modern age a great description of what consciousness is. As a neurologist, I have studied aspects of consciousness at the clinical level, and my work in critical care neurology is largely a reflection of a career in solving problems involving disorders of consciousness. What I find puzzling as a neurologist is that so much of a focus of what I do in my clinical work is to solve problems regarding a concept that we as a society have not accurately described and defined. Like other words that are ill defined, consciousness is subject to the fallacy of reification. Now, I've discussed the fallacy of reification in a prior video, which I'll put in my show notes below, which you can see on my channel. The fallacy of reification occurs when someone treats an abstract concept, idea, or hypothetical construct as if it were a real, physical, and actual thing. Reification can mislead reasoning because it distorts the responsibility of accurately representing the phenomena you're trying to describe. And it also encourages faulty inferences when we treat abstractions as literal things that we end up assigning them characteristics that they cannot logically possess. So if in the modern age we have not well-defined consciousness and we want to improve our understanding of it, we need to go back to its historical philosophical roots. We need to go back to where we were able to describe this phenomena in the past. And so in this video, that's what I intend to do. One of our earliest descriptions of consciousness comes from prehistoric times. In southwestern France, a famous photo from about 18,000 years ago in the Upper Paleolithic Magdalenian period was identified in the Lascaux caves. The painting is referred to as the scene of a dead man. This Paleolithic art depicts a human figure along wounded and disemboweled bison, a bird on a stick, and a rhinoceros. The man is drawn with outstretched arms, bird-like figures, and an erection, seemingly dead or unconscious. A number of scholars have interpreted the scene as a hunting accident, a shamanic trance, or a bird vision. The sleep researcher, Michael Jouvet, interpreted this finding as a dreamer, and his interpretation of the image was that of a hunter or a man in a specific phase of sleep, which he dubbed paradoxical because it does not look like sleep. During this specific period of sleep, the brain is almost as active as if it is in wakefulness, where eyes are moving fast in rapid directions. In the modern time, we refer to this as rapid eye movement in sleep. In males, this phase is invariably accompanied by a strong erection, even when these dreams are not consisting of sexual content. The bird in the image has been referred to as a symbolic representation of a shaman spirit, a soul leaving the body, or a marker of flight and transcendence. There are other artistic depictions of ancient times that show us how we have thought of consciousness in the pre-scientific era. A conventional depiction of the great god Osiris shows him lying on his back, penis erect, while Isis the owl hovers over his body, taking his sperm to engender Horus. In the Upanishads, a sacred Hindu text, the soul is depicted as a dove that flies away at death and may come back as a spirit. With the advent of Christianity centuries later, the Holy Spirit has been depicted as white-winged birds, and white wings appear on visiting angels in biblical texts. There are depictions of Egyptian phoenix and the Finnish silentu, which represent soul birds that deliver a psyche to newborns and take it away from dying flying spirits. These appear as universal metaphors for the subconscious mind. Behind these allegories of birds stands an intuition we have, that the content of our mind is radically different from that which appears on our bodies. We know that we dream. While we lay still with our thoughts and wander into remote realms of imagination, concept formation, and our memory. In Book 7 of the Republic, Plato provides his famous Allegory of the Cave, which represents one of philosophy's most powerful metaphors for human perception, knowledge, and consciousness. In the story, there are prisoners in a cave chained inside a dark lair from birth, unable to turn their heads. They only face a wall. Behind them is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people walk carrying objects. The prisoners see the shadows of these objects cast upon the cave wall itself. To the prisoners, these shadows are the only reality that they know, that which they perceive. They give names to the shadows and they build their understanding of what exists in the world around that which they perceive. However, this is their only perception of reality that they know. If one prisoner becomes freed and turns toward the fire and outside world, he experiences pain and disorientation, but eventually perceives the true form of things under the light of the sun. If enlightened, the prisoner can return to the cave to explain this higher reality to other prisoners. He may experience resistance from them, or even be attacked from them as they prefer the comfort of their familiar shadows. In the allegory of the cave symbolizes the limits of ordinary perception. We often mistake appearances for reality itself. Consciousness, in its unexamined state, is bound to these illusions. The painful process of leaving the cave mirrored the difficulty of transcending habitual thought, ego, or societal conditioning. Consciousness can expand from surface-level awareness to higher understanding. Just as fellow prisoners resisted their newly freed enlightened colleague, human beings often resist challenges to their worldview. Consciousness is not just about seeing the truth, but also about overcoming psychological barriers to accepting it. In the modern day, the most relevant film demonstrating the core concepts of Plato's Allegory of the Cave is The Matrix. In The Matrix, Neo lives in the Matrix. He perceives the world around him, and those around him do not observe anything beyond what they perceive about how the world works in front of them. Neo, unlike others, does have some intuition that something just isn't right. He does get the opportunity by taking the red pill to get out of the Matrix and to be able to see the world for what it is. Initially, when he sees the Matrix for what it is, he is in denial, representing some of the challenges that the prisoners in the cave had to understanding their confinement. However, as he experiences his initial climb to transcendence, he accepts the world for what it is. And Morpheus describes to Neo, however, there are people in the Matrix so dependent and bound by it that they will fight for whatever it is and defend it. This represents the challenge we all experience fully understanding our world and being able to accept better explanations for the observations we observe and the challenges we have compelling others to change their worldview in the presence of conflicting observations. In Christian texts, Thomas Aquinas provided a detailed theory on the concept of the soul, its faculties, and its relationship to knowledge and awareness. He defined the soul, following Aristotle, as the substantive form of the living body. He described that the soul is what makes the body alive. It is not separate from the body in essence, but it is immaterial and subsistent, meaning that it can exist apart from the body after death. To Thomas Aquinas, humans have a unique kind of soul, the rational soul, which includes powers of the intellect and will, in addition to the vegetative, grown in nutrition, and the sensitive, perception and movement, power that is shared within animals. For Aquinas, consciousness as we think about it is best mapped by the faculty of the intellect, or understanding. He held that the intellect not only knows external things, but can reflect on its own acts. This is what we refer to as self-awareness. Thomas Aquinas distinguished between direct knowledge of the self, or what we lack in this life, and indirect knowledge of the self, or that which we have by reflecting on our operations. To Aquinas, we don't, quote, see the soul directly, end quote, but we infer its existence by observing our acts and thoughts and will. Human beings are aware of themselves, not as objects among objects, but as subjects who think and will to act. Unlike the separate nature that Plato described in his allegory of a prisoner in the cave, Aquinas viewed the soul and the body together forming one human person. Conscious awareness for him is not something that is floating free, but the operation of a spiritual principle, the rational soul, that is united to the body. Aquinas described that after the death, the soul survives and retains intellectual and volitional powers. Consciousness to him was the direct vision of God, and is only possible in the afterlife in what Aquinas referred to as beatific vision. In an earthly life, our consciousness is always mediated by sensory experience. It is only in union with God after death that the soul knows its fullness. In the 17th century, the French philosopher Rene Descartes described what we now refer to as dualism, the thesis that the conscious mind is made of non-material substance that eludes the normal laws of physics. Dualism was based on a logical argument that asserted the impossibility of a machine ever mimicking freedom of conscious mind. In his book, referred to as Description of the Human Body, Passions of the Soul, and L'Homme, or Man, Descartes presented a mechanistic perspective on the inner operation of the body. He referred to it as sophisticated automata that our body and brains literally act as a collection of organs, of instruments compared to those found in churches of his time, with massive bellows of a spectral fluid called animal spirits that get into reservoirs and then a broad variety of pipes whose combinations generate all the rhythms and musics of their actions. Descartes had a concept of the hydraulic brain, which had no difficulty in moving itself toward an object. To him, the inner decision-making was located in the pineal gland and leaned in a certain direction, sending spirits flowing to precisely the appropriate movement or limbs of the limbs to direct an action. Memory corresponded to the reinforcement of some of these pathways. Descartes described mechanistic models for sleep, which he theorized to be reduced pressure of the spirits. When the source of animal spirits was abundant, it circulated throughout every nerve, and this pressure machine was ready to respond to any type of stimulation, providing a model in the wake state. When the pressure weakened, the lowly speaker is capable of moving only a few threads, making the person fall asleep. In Meditation, the First Philosophy, Descartes set out to find a foundation for knowledge so firm that it could not be doubted. His strategy was radical doubt, or radical skepticism. He thought that the senses can deceive through illusions and dreams. He thought that reasoning could fall through logical and mathematical errors. He had a concept of the evil demon hypothesis where the external world could be an illusion. He intended in his writing to strip away all uncertain belief until he reached something that was indubitable. When doubting everything, Descartes realized that even if he doubts, he must exist in order to doubt. Even if deceived by malicious demons, there must be a thinker being deceived. Even if all perceptions are illusions, the act of thinking still affirms the existence of a subject doing the thinking. Thus, he described cogito ergo sum, or I think therefore I am. This was not a logical syllogism so much as it was a direct self-evident intuition or self-evident truth. Whenever he engages in thought, his own existence as a thinking subject cannot be denied. Cogito ergo sum represents the primacy of subject awareness. Consciousness, the act of thinking, doubting, or willing, is the first undeniable fact. The existence of the self is more certain than the existence of the external world. Descartes established the subjective standpoint as the starting point for philosophy. This shifted focus from the metaphysical speculation about reality being out there to the inner certainty of conscious experience. Dualism emerged because thought was the only undeniable truth. Descartes concluded that the mind is distinct from the body. The separation of the mind and body has shaped centuries of philosophy and neuroscience debates about the nature of consciousness. Descartes did not intend cogito ergo sum as a proof deduced by logic, but rather as a self-authenticating truth, something that is grafted directly by the mind. It's less about proving the I exists as a person or body, and more about proving that the act of consciousness itself is undeniable. As science has evolved, there are philosophers and scientists who have criticized Descartes for his concept of dualism. In Antonio Damasio's book, Descartes' Error, Emotion, Reason, and the Human Brain, Damasio critiques Cartesian dualism and repositions consciousness. Damasio calls dualism an error of thinking that the mind can be understood without reference to the body, emotions, and biological regulation. Damasio describes that consciousness is embodied and it cannot be divorced from the body. Emotions and feelings, which arise from the body's homeostatic regulation, are integral to how we think and make decisions. Without the body's signal, rational thought itself breaks down. Damasio referred to studies where emotions precede and guide reasoning. This conflicts with the idea of consciousness as pure thought. Damasio described the self as being self-layered. The proto-self represents basic body regulation. The core self represents moment-to-moment awareness, rooted in emotional and bodily states. And the autobiographical self represents the extended consciousness with memory, identity, and narrative. To Damasio, Descartes placed consciousness in the realm of pure thought, separating from bodily processes. Damasio focused on the idea that consciousness emerges from the interaction of the brain, body, and environment, not from thought alone. Our history of describing consciousness from the pre-scientific era to the advent of scientific testing has shown us that what we can observe about descriptions of the content of our thoughts, Self-evident truths such as cogito ergo sum challenge us in terms of thinking through the idea of what is real and what is not. Even in light of scientific advancements that provide a better explanation for how we experience the world, there are core concepts such as the prisoners resisting the freed in Plato's cave that provide a powerful allegory for how we experience resistance in our world when we try to help others identify what is true. Clearly, these foundational observations dating back to pre-scientific times clearly carry relevance to this very day. I hope you found this video useful. I hope for it to be the first in a series of videos where we'll go further in depth describing what consciousness is, and then start to discuss the emerging scientific theories of the neural correlates of consciousness and how consciousness evolves, what the evidence is behind that, and how we are emerging to be able to try to solve our long-standing problems and disorders of consciousness and the problems relating to consciousness in the modern age and in the clinical domain. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe it, and please like it and subscribe to my channel, and I hope you have a great day.